Now that it's the new year and I'm diversifying my tech projects, I want to make something a little bigger than what I've done before. I want to make something that I'll actually be excited to use myself on the regular, and hopefully you will too. After graduating from college and having to actually adult for the first time, I really got into cooking. I would spend every break at home watching my mom cook her delicious South Indian classics. In our household, those were things like fish pulusu, eggplant tomato curry, different types of dal, etc. I would take some mental notes and go back to my apartment in San Francisco to try to recreate that magic. And after forgetting everything I've learned, I would text my mom again for the recipe and continue to bother her throughout the night with questions about my cooking. A year later, I've gotten a lot more experimental with my cooking, and I usually browse informal Facebook groups to see what others are trying. This has led me to have a bunch of recipe screenshots on my phone that I save for later but never actually try. So whether it's my mom's home cooking or new recipes from my friends or internet strangers, I want to find a better way to store these informal recipes. And that's when the light bulb went off. So here's my idea. I want to create an app that stores your screenshots of these recipes all in one place. Then you can search for keywords like maybe an ingredient or the recipe's title itself to look for these recipes. You can keep track of the recipes you tried and what your progress shots look like at every step of the way. Beyond that, there could be maybe some type of community aspect to it. Maybe I can tag my mom in her recipes on the app, and if she wants, she can see how my attempts turned out or my progress. Or if my friend and I are cooking at the same time, which really is peak adulthood, we can send each other snaps of what we're making. So let's see what it'll take to make this a reality. So first, we need to create an MVP, a minimum viable product. In my case, this is just an app that stores screenshots and allows search. So if I want to make fish curry, I can just search fish in the app instead of scouring my family's WhatsApp chats. In order to make this happen, we need a few things. First, we have to get photos into the app. One way to do this would be to sync with a screenshots folder on my phone. The problem here is that not every screenshot is a recipe, so it's a waste of resources to store or search through all those images. I also don't know how I would actually implement this, so let's think of something else. Another idea would be to have a drop zone to upload the picture to the app. So the user can choose what they want to add, and this is definitely easier to implement and makes more sense for this use case. A third alternative option or add-on option would be to have a way to share the picture from an app like Google Photos to this app. This would be a nice to have, but isn't something that is super necessary. Second, we'll need a storage framework to keep track of all these screenshots. This is some territory I'm not super familiar with, but after seeing other people's projects, I realized I can use a tool like MMKV, which was developed by WeChat. And still in the foreign territory of storage and optimization, I'll need to use some sort of optimization model or queue to process only a predetermined number of images at a time. And finally, we'll need to have a search bar to actually search for the ingredient or recipe. Given the query, we'll have to implement a pre-existing OCR or search API to be able to read the text in the screenshots, search for that query, and display the results in an order that makes sense on the app. Once we get that basic functionality, it would be nice to add some pictures or perhaps notes to the recipe. In order to do this, we would have to use some other API to take the screenshot and convert the text in the image into plain text. Then, this can be imported into a simple note structure that can use a Markdown-inspired text editor like this one. The user can then rearrange the text and add modifications or formatting to the recipe. They could also potentially embed images into the text file using a camera plugin. So this would essentially mean that for all the recipes a user hasn't tried, just the screenshot will be stored. And then for those that they did try, the recipe is stored as a text file or note. And now is when we can add the social aspect to this, like sharing recipes between friends. For this to happen, we need to create some format of the recipe that can be exported to non-users. We'd also add a login process at this stage so we can more easily share between friends who are on the app. For this to happen, we'll need to implement a user database, a login/signup UI, different views for both your recipes and the recipes shared with you, and a way for the data to be communicated and transmitted between users. And this can also be expanded to create a news feed of what your friends are cooking so you can continue to take inspiration from each other. And if I ever get to phase 4, I'd like to figure out a way to step back into phase 1, and instead of making the user have to manually parse the text in a recipe in a manner that they prefer, the app can instead automatically parse those results. At this point, I'm up in the clouds because I don't really know how I'll implement this, so let's keep it more open-ended for now. When I made my last video where I created my first Android app in Kotlin, I didn't think much about the stack that I was using. But now I want to put more thought into what framework or tools that I use. And after reading your comments and doing my own research, I found that there are 3 main contenders. The obvious benefit of Kotlin is that I spent a couple of days learning it, so it's still fresh in my memory. Also, apps built with Kotlin have all their components built natively, so they're naturally super slick and fast. However, the biggest con here is that I can't easily port over my application to iOS if I wanted to. Also, I'm still not super familiar with the language since I'm still rusty on Java. I actually spent more than a year at my last job working with React.js for full stack web development. So whether I liked it or not, I became relatively adept with JavaScript and specifically React. React Native also allows for development for both iOS and Android, which is a huge plus. This has also been out there for a while, so it's proven in its performance by thousands of developers and companies. The only cons I found is that it lacks some custom modules, but otherwise it's a solid choice. Finally, we have Flutter. This is something relatively newly developed by Google that works on iOS, Android, web, and somehow desktop. Compared to React Native, Flutter is very rich in its custom widgets, APIs, and UI components. It's said to have a milder learning curve due to its strongly typed Dart programming language. But learning Dart could also be a con since it's the only language listed here that I actually have no idea about. The main con here, though, is that Flutter is new, so there is some risk involved with something that hasn't been thoroughly tested out and proven like React. So right now it's between React Native and Flutter because TBH, I didn't love Kotlin enough to commit. I reviewed a bunch of comparison articles, and even though I already know React, I want to try Flutter because, I like living life on the edge. But who knows, I might change my mind. You'll have to watch next week's video to find out.
And what can I say? Mamba out.